All right, today we're going to be talking about the sugar diet. Danny Jones, who I've been on his podcast before, and we're going to have him on Mark Bell's Power Project pretty soon. He had Nick Norwitz on, and he had Dr. Paul Saladino. And these guys have a really interesting debate. They go back and forth on some stuff. They agree on some stuff. And they talked a bunch about the sugar diet. So without further ado, let's check this out.
What do you guys think? I'm sure you've seen Mark Bell's sugar diet. Have you seen this?
I've covered it. Yeah.
Yeah, you made a video about it.
Yeah.
What is going on there?
I'm fascinated by it. So this is one of those things where, to be honest, when it comes up, there are certain things where like you have your own mental heuristics, and I'm like, I'm triaging this to the junk pile. But coincidentally, a paper came out in Nature Metabolism right around the same time. This did not actually influence. This is just a coincidence. It didn't influence Mark's decision to do it, but it was an experiment, actually 3 controlled studies. So a sugar diet's one type of protein restricted diet. If you're eating just fruit and fruit juice and candy, you're going to protein restrict. Protein restriction causes about the lean, healthy men a 600-ish increase in energy expenditure
600
per day
calories.
without any increase.
Yeah, he meant to say 600 calories. He just says 600, which is like just a random number. He's talking about 600 calories. The reason why I did do the sugar diet was because of some of the stuff that he's about to mention. And it was in collaboration with the sugar diet being backed by a couple studies, but not the studies that he's talking about, because those studies came out while I was already doing the sugar diet.
So it was a 19 to 21% increase in total energy expenditure without changes in activity, no changes in thyroid hormone or other hormones generally associated with changes in energy expenditure. It was very consistent.
A 21% increase in your metabolism is amazing. Unfortunately, like, I'm not a researcher. I don't know how to comb through the research the same way that these guys do. These guys are very talented. Just researchers in general, they're very good at what they do. But I wonder like 21% compared to what, standard American diet? Or because I wonder, is there other ways to get there? And that's always my questioning, and that's why some of you have called me a big flip-flopper, where I'm always changing diets. I'm not necessarily like just trying to change diets. I am trying to find something that, just works amazing. That's all. That's all I'm trying to do. And whether it's been dry fasting, intermittent fasting, keto, carnivore, or anything there in between, the vertical diet, my own diet, the war on carbs. I've kept aspects of these other types of diets within my diet for a long time. Just as an example, protein leveraging. I still utilize the principles of protein leveraging all the time. I still utilize the principles of intermittent fasting often, but more recently, I just no longer intermittent fast. Instead, what I do is I do the sugar fast. And the sugar fast, we can keep in mind, when I was experimenting with it, I was experimenting with it, and I was eating more candy. I was doing more stuff like that. I don't really do that as much anymore. It's much lower amount, and I also don't even necessarily do the sugar fast every day. The sugar fast is usually done like 1 to maybe 3 times a week. This week I'm hitting it up for probably twice this week. Today's the second day. I don't know if I'll do it tomorrow, if I'll skip it or whatever, but I'm eating more protein now, and on the days that I sugar fast, I just eat protein later on in the evening, which is something that might be interesting to see Paul Saladino give a try to. So let's catch up with more of this.
The protein restriction was 9% of calories from protein, and then when they went back up to like 18% calories from protein, their metabolic rate lowered. Mm-hmm. And what they were able to show is in these people, it was an increasing level of this hormone called FGF21, mostly made from the liver, which appeared to be signaling to fat cells to make the fat cells expend more energy. So then they did mouse models, because you can manipulate mouse models to kind of prove causality. And they were able to show like a causal pathway whereby FGF21 changes fat cell metabolism, increases energy expenditure quite massively. They tested first a high carb, low protein diet. So 70% carb, 9% protein. That wasn't the only one they did.
I just want to say too, and you're going to hear some different discourse back and forth between Nick and Paul. I'm not advocating for like this low protein all the time. I think people have a tendency to get like really bent out of shape when you start talking about certain things. They get mad before they really hear anything else that you're about to say. keep in mind that even when I was doing sugar fasting and even when I was doing the sugar diet, I would say that when you're sugar fasting, that it's important that you don't eat protein and it's important that you don't eat starch. And I don't really have a lot of evidence that it's important that you don't eat starch, but I do have evidence that it's not a great idea to eat protein because you're kind of messing with that part of the diet. You're messing with that activation of that FGF21 potentially, and GDF15, which is another one, and PDF25. PDF25, I just made that up. PDF, get it? PDF 25 is the year. All right. Anyway, back to it. Anyway, I want to bring that up because I still consume protein. And on the days where I sugar fast, I just consume protein later in the day. So I'm taking advantage of, or this is the way it works out in my mind. I fast through the evening, just like a normal person, just sleeping, right? And then I wake up, I have fruit juice. Maybe a few hours later, I have fruit juice. Maybe a few hours later, have a smoothie, and then it's time for me to eat. It's 1 p.m. or 4 p.m. Just depends on the day when I get to my food. I eat, and then more recently I've been lifting in the evening, so I will eat, lift, and eat, and that'll be my day. I feel like I'm, getting like leaner. I feel like I'm pretty like full, carbohydrate wise. I feel like I'm pretty jacked, and everything's feeling really good. That is, why I'm doing this diet, and also I wanted to just point out that the protein, it's not perpetually low. It's just like low on a couple days, and so I think your protein. Obviously, your protein like matters a little bit per day, but your protein matters a lot more, just like your calories matter a lot more per week than it does necessarily per day. And one thing I'm not doing with the sugar diet anymore is I'm not going honey, maple syrup, sugar, candy, fruit, and fruit juice, with the primary being fruit and fruit juice. And so I did do that for a couple days in a row. And I did a couple bouts of that, but I didn't really like that. So the longest I'll probably do that again would be for, 16 hours, 24 hours, maybe a 36 hour here and there, just to kind of see what kind of results I get again from messing with that. But I went a little too far with doing it for too many days, where I did it for 5 days and 7 days and 10 days and stuff like that. It was just, it didn't seem to have any extra benefit if I did it for too long. And then you start to mess with your body composition, which is not something that you want to do. I don't want to tamper with losing muscle mass at all. So if my goal was just to lose weight, then I'd probably continue on the sugar fast. But my goal is not to lose weight. My goal is to lose body fat.
There's 9% protein, 41% carb, 50% fat, if I recall. So you could engineer this with ice cream, basically.
Okay.
Same effect. Same massive increase in energy expenditure.
Yeah, Anabology. He's a guy on the internet too that I interviewed before on this channel. Great information. He said you can't really do it with ice cream. He's tried it. He tried it for like 8 weeks and he's like, I just got fatter. One of the issues with ice cream is that you're going to go over your caloric limit very easily. So like, Nick is saying, you got a 600 calorie boost. Okay, well, 600 calories when you're eating ice cream is not that much. 600 calories of kind of like regular food or lean food, or 600 calories of egg whites, or 600 calories of, some rice and some chicken breasts, probably like noteworthy. But 600 calories of ice cream just probably isn't really that much. And so I don't think you're going to be able to do it with ice cream. The other problem with ice cream is it does have protein in it. And he said 9% protein. And that could be, I guess you can find some ice creams that are, lowish enough in protein to maybe get some of the job done with what he's referring to in terms of the macros, but I don't think it'll work great. Anyway, keep it going.
They also have the participants increase their energy intake to try to not lose weight. And I think in most of the studies, they needed to increase their energy intake by quite a lot, and then they still lost a little bit of weight. So they did high carb and high carb, high fat. I did another video where I replicated this using a ketogenic diet. So a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, which is 90% fat. So also low protein, same effect.
That's gross. When you eat the fat like that, I mean, I was with him at Harvard and we were talking about it and he's like, yeah, it's pretty gross. You're eating like butter. I mean, having your diet be 90% fat is a really tough thing to do. Even 70% or 80% fat is just very difficult. And then from a workout standpoint, they're not like us. They don't love to lift maybe the same exact way that we do. And for those of you that love to lift, just running off of fat is like, it sucks because there's really nothing you can have before a training session. And I know you don't necessarily need anything before a training session, but I personally kind of like that hedonic response of having a little something before a training session, a little bit of candy, or when I was doing meat and fruit, some fruit before the gym, some fruit juice, a Rice Krispie treat, rice cakes, any of these things, kind of great to have like a little something, not a lot of food, just a little something before you go train. And when you're consuming fat like that, never mind having like a little treat on the way to the gym. You can't even eat 2 or 3 hours before the gym. If you're training hard, all that fat is just kind of sitting in your gut and you're like, oh. Anyway, keep it going.
Eat enough to keep the weight on. I was just up titrating the calories. And in like 3 weeks, I lost over 6 pounds. And by the end, I'd increased my caloric intake on average over like the whole up titration by over 300 calories per day. I think I calculated it as like, I should have been in a quote unquote 6,000 calorie surplus, but I lost 6.4 pounds.
So
I think he messed up there. I don't think he meant to say 6,000 calorie surplus. I think he meant to say 600 calorie surplus. So he was technically, quote unquote, in a 600 calorie surplus, which you supposedly can't be in a surplus and lose weight at the same time. But through this mechanism of sugar fasting, or this mechanism rather of protein restriction and the release of FGF21, now we have something that's possible that's never been possible before. Ladies and gentlemen, you can thank me. You can send me $1 if you want. Send it over to MarkBellSlingshot.com. Appreciate it. But yeah, that's interesting. He was able to lose 6.4 pounds. You got to keep in mind that Nick Norwitz only weighs 6 pounds. So he got down to almost like 0.20 pounds. He's a very light guy anyway to begin with, and he's very lean. He's a lean mass hyper-responder, as they call him. And when you're lean like that, like your body doesn't really want to lose weight at that point. So for him to lose that amount of weight in that amount of time, it's kind of groundbreaking, really. Like, is this FGF21? Is some of this bullshit diet, this grifting that I've been doing, is this going to lead to the next retatrutide? Is this going to lead to this this hormone FGF21? Is it going to end up in the next GLP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Is it going to be in the next, the next thing that is the new weight loss drug? It could be. And it's just for me dicking around with something. It just shows, it's a good idea to investigate. It's a good idea to poke around. If for nothing else, just for fun. Just to try something new, just to try something different. And I can't wait to have Danny Jones out here, and I can't wait to get back on his show again and kind of dive into this a little deeper and talk about this more. But there hasn't been anything in nutrition in a long time. There was the keto diet, which kind of took everyone by storm a couple times, and it's come and gone. I started doing a ketogenic diet in the 90s, and I still love that diet. I still love the carnivore diet. I still love the meat and fruit. I'm a fan of those diets. They all have been helpful to me. The ketogenic diet being the most helpful. The ketogenic diet is something that I utilized, and then I shifted a little bit away from keto and went just regular low carb. Started mixing in a little bit of carbohydrates, and I lost over 100 pounds. I used to be 330 pounds. And recently, Joe Rogan was talking about the sugar diet as well. And he was like, well, Mark's always been jacked. He's showing these pictures of him being jacked and ripped and shredded and everything, but he's always been that way. And I think, Joe knows that that's not necessarily true. He knows I haven't always been shredded, but I think what he meant was that I've always been lifting. I've always been jacked, right? And I used to be 330 pounds. And I know some people don't want to account that obesity that I had when I was 330 pounds, but I was fat. I was fat and sick, just like any other big fat person. The only difference was I could squat 1,000 pounds and bench over 850 pounds. I was just as fat and just as sick as anybody else. I had pre-diabetes, high blood pressure. My shins were bright red, poor circulation, just absolutely abysmal, just horrible cardiovascular, the whole thing. I was not that way for very long, luckily. And a low carb diet is what kind of launched me into, because I utilized a low carb diet in the 90s when I was kind of like around the time I was graduating high school, and I utilized it to lose some weight. And I've always obsessed over the ketogenic diet, which I still love, which I still will go back to probably there's going to be a point where I go back to a ketogenic diet or go back to a low carb diet because I love it. And I also love eating some of those foods. I love bacon. I love avocado. I love whole eggs. I love cheese. I love all that. So there's no question I will be utilizing some of those strategies again. Just as I mentioned earlier, I utilize a lot of strategies within my own diet that I follow. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. All right, let's keep it rolling.
Low protein, which is the common
low
denominator.
protein. And people are going to ask about the whole muscle thing. There wasn't significant effects on muscle loss, and there was a change in nitrogen balance. There was a trend towards decreasing muscle mass or lean mass, but that's also coupled with a decrease in overall body mass. So it's not clear how this would affect physiology in the long term. And then just to add one more very interesting nuance is they genetically manipulated mice to increase FGF21 just at the fat cells. The mice lived longer in an obesogenic context, but they lived longer with same or increased energy expenditure and improvements in body composition. The mere fact that in mammals, you can change fat cell metabolism with one hormone and change a mammal's lifespan speaks to how incredibly important fat cell metabolism is.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think that we're going to hear more people talk about like the brown fat and stuff like that over the next couple years. Maybe there'll even be a drug that turns your regular fat into brown fat. But brown fat seems to be something that can really change our metabolism in general as well. And I haven't really heard much reference to that in some of this, but maybe that's what the sugar diet, maybe that's what some of this type of food, maybe that's what it promotes. I do also think that there's something to, not necessarily just a sugar diet, but I do think there's a difference between eating carbohydrate and eating fat. I do believe, and have even seen in my own blood work that my T3, my T4, a lot of things are like better when I eat carbohydrate. And sometimes it's just a small amount, like not even a lot of carbohydrate, just, 100, 200 grams of carbohydrates in a day. It's almost like my body, fully understands like what to do with that. It's not as if the body's like, oh my God, I don't understand what's happening. And it's like, you're, getting like hypo or hyper glycemic or anything from going from low carb to eating carbs. I didn't experience, excuse me, too many things like that. But there is something about keeping that carbohydrate metabolism going. And it seems like when your carbohydrate metabolism is going, it seems like it's easier to stay lean. And you think about like some of the leanest people, they usually are pretty carb heavy. The leanest people aren't usually keto heavy. And again, I hate to always just bring up like bodybuilding and physique competitions, but those people, they very rarely utilize keto. They just normally don't. I'm not saying it can't work. I know that there's some people that do, but it's like probably 98% of people that like, and I'm not even saying that being shredded is healthy. I'm just saying like people can do this extreme version of holding on to the craziest amount of body composition, even if it is just for this short period of time, with carbohydrates and protein and very modest to low fat. Now, take the stage aside and say, okay, well, people looking like they're 6 weeks out or 4 weeks out or something like that from a show is ridiculous, and they shouldn't always look that way. I agree. I understand. Fair. Makes sense. I get it. I totally get it. And also that it's not healthy, right? Just like what I was doing, pushing the envelope with powerlifting, that side of things is unhealthy as well. And maybe I'll look back at this time in my life and be like, man, what I was doing back then was so unhealthy. But I don't feel like what I'm doing is unhealthy. I feel like what I'm doing is awesome. I feel very good. But just because I feel very good doesn't really mean a ton. Let's see what Paul Saladino has to say about some of this.
I think the problems with the honey diet or the sugar diet are that it doesn't really work it's not sustainable long term, right?
Right.
So it's not going to do well long term.
Not going to do well long term. Wasn't this the carnivore guy? Isn't the guy write a book on the carnivore diet, right? Sustainability and stuff like that. I never loved that as an argument because sustainable in what way? What about the way that I'm using the sugar diet right now where I'm using it intermittently? You know, Paul's going to talk about his diet in a little bit. He eats meat and fruit. I think I had a big impact on that. Maybe I didn't. I can't wait to get on his show too and communicate with him about that. Paul and I are good friends. Nick and I are good friends, by the way. We're all friends. But I did mention to Paul, I remember talking to him on the phone and leaving him a message even saying, dude, why don't you just wake up tomorrow and eat like 400 grams of carbohydrate just so you can understand, like have a day where you have 300 or 400 grams of carbohydrate and you lift and you'll be like, oh, that's what people are talking about. You know, I think he kind of like dismissed it and he's like, I can never do that. I don't know. I was like, well, do it with fruit. Do it with, whatever way you can get there, do it that way. And I don't know if I impacted him to be like, oh, I'm going to change the next day. We'd all like to think that we influence our friends that strongly, but maybe I didn't. But anyway, yeah, thinking about sustainability of something like, even for Paul now, right? Let's just say he's like, oh, like let's say it's a year from now, okay? And Paul's like, you know what? I just realized, on the weekends it's a good idea for me to chill, without the fruit, because I'm hammering a little bit too much fruit. I don't surf as much as I used to. I don't exercise as much as I used to, so I'm going to cut back. And then he would what? He would do what? Carnivore diet. He would be carnivoring, on the weekend. The thing that he said isn't sustainable. Or the thing that he found for himself maybe was no longer sustainable to a certain degree. So the sustainability comment, I don't like it for any of the diets because I don't think it's true. No matter what the diet is, not all diets are meant to be sustainable in the first place. Like a bodybuilding prep is not meant to be sustainable. You just do it for a little while to get the results from it. And then you shift into something different. So this idea of something being sustainable, I don't love it because, and I see a lot of these people like Paul, Nick, and a lot of other people, they're basically just in the same spot that they've always been in terms of like what they're doing. Like maybe they're making some progress with some things that they're doing, but they're not really trying to change or manipulate. With me, that's the difference, is I'm trying to change and manipulate. So if I'm going to change and manipulate anything, then it makes sense that like other habits have to change, right? And then when I make those changes, I might not make those changes to where I'm like, okay, I'm doing this for a year. I'm doing this for 6 months. Like it doesn't have to be like that. And that's the same thing that's happened with me with the sugar diet. It's like, I did it strictly and utilized it a lot for about 6 months and implemented a bunch of different ways and sprinkled it in. And then what did I do? I found what's working best for me now. And now I'm into this phase and this stage. And as I mentioned earlier, I might utilize it a little bit longer. But sugar fasting, the sugar diet is very sustainable. My brother's girlfriend has been using it. She's lost like 25 pounds. She's not a big person to begin with. And my brother was like, yeah, she's looking amazing. And I was like, well, what is she doing? He's like, she's still on the sugar diet. She loves it. She's an EMT and she doesn't like to get weighed down by a bunch of food. So she'll just grab a little bit of candy here and there and fruit and fruit juice and stuff like that. And she just goes about her day. She'll have like a 12-hour shift and then she'll come home and probably eat a little bit more normal and then start the next day over again. So it can be sustainable. There are people that are doing it.
We don't know what the effects are long-term with uncoupling this at this sort of metabolism at the level of mitochondria with FGF21. Mm-hmm. I think that it's interesting. Like Nick is saying, it's instructive. It's like a human petri dish. Maybe it helps people jumpstart their weight loss a little bit. But the problem is like, you need amino acids for other things, right? You need amino acids to make neurotransmitters.
He did say that we don't know the long-term impact. And that's interesting. And I would agree. If somebody is doing, the sugar diet and they're just like dumping sugar on everything and they're eating candy and like, it kind of reminds me of keto back in the day. Like I was never one for like dumping oil on stuff. And I was never one for like oversaturating everything with like extra amounts of fat. But I did participate in some of that. I would use heavy cream. I would use coconut oil here and there, stuff like that. So if someone's like overdoing, if someone is taking out of context the sugar diet, or they're taking it like literal, right? They're like sugar diet and they're just like smashing sugar. There's not a lot of people in recorded history that we have as examples of people that have eaten considerable amounts of sugar. And you might be like, what? You're full of shit. People eat tons of sugar. We don't have probably a lot of record of people eating sugar without the fat. In fact, there's probably almost next to no, well, not next to no research, but there's probably, I don't know much about it. And maybe that's, maybe I'm naive. Maybe I haven't looked into it much. Maybe there is. But in eating like, large amounts of carbohydrate, large amounts of sugar, in the absence of fat, where fat is like 10% of your diet or less, like there's not a culture, there's nobody, no one's really done that. So he's correct in saying like, I don't really think there's long-term studies on that. But one of the reasons why I mentioned the fat being part of it is that sugar is demonized mainly because of fat. Fat was mainly demonized because of sugar. It's when the two are together when we start to really run into a lot of issues. And again, I don't mean together like in one meal. I don't mean you ate a bowl of ice cream and now you have big time problems. I mean overall, because it usually leads to overeating and it usually leads to caloric toxicity. That caloric toxicity could then lead to a lot of other toxicity in your body, whether it be you're overloading the liver, you're overloading the pancreas, you are causing too much fluctuations of your insulin and so forth, or your blood sugar's too high for too long. Most of those things don't normally, under normal circumstances, just come from sugar. They normally come from a combination of sugar and fat. You start really messing with our lipids and messing with our glucose. When we're messing with both is when we tend to run into more problems. So hopefully, maybe somebody can hammer me with some studies where this has been researched a little bit more. Now keep in mind, sometimes if you bring up mice, like mice can be like manipulated in some really interesting ways. They can be given straight fructose. Where like in human studies, it's like it's hard to give people, you know what I mean? It's hard to keep a person on a particular diet plan, much less keep them on straight fructose. And you can't even really get straight fructose from fruit because fruit is like, depending on the type of fruit, sometimes it has some fructose in it. Sometimes, it's all over the place.
So yeah, this doesn't work great long term. It's not the panacea.
No,
right.
It's an interesting illustration of metabolism.
I'm not condoning it by any means, but it's one of these things where sometimes
evil with
BS
his fingers
is BS.
like that.
Other times you can pick at the BS and there's something fascinating underneath as a teaching point. I put the sugar diet in that category. Do I think it's a good idea? No. You can even get the same effects by eating a non-sugar diet that's protein restricted. So this is like a subset of protein restricted diets, and that's how it works.
There might be some truth to that, but like we've had, a lot of people do the sugar diet and a lot of people had success doing the sugar diet. I know a lot of people abandon it too, and I'm aware that it like sort of it dwindled down, right? But the sugar diet will have its day again. Like it'll continue. It's not going anywhere because this research of the FGF21 and wait till they start to actually look more into the GDF15 and stuff like that. When they start to understand what's happening and they start to see it over a longer period. I mean, some weird shit happened. And people are like, I don't know why people are in denial, but like weird stuff happened. First of all, some people lost weight pretty rapidly. Now, I'll say this about rapid weight loss, even Nick's own experience with losing 6 pounds. Rapid weight loss is not where it's at. You want continued gradual weight loss. although it's nice to see some quick weight loss, right? So the fact that it can help with weight management fairly quickly leads me to believe like, hey, why don't we just do this like a couple times a month? Just do it like here and there, have it replace intermittent fasting, and do it once a month, once a week, twice a month. I don't know, like just stick it in wherever you want. What about coming off vacation and maybe you ate some awesome stuff while you were on vacation, honeymoon, whatever it might be, gained a couple lbs. Well, boom, sugar fast, and knock down some of that weight. Are we losing muscle mass when we sugar fast? Well, I would say if you do it perpetually, if you do it for a long time. What's a long time? Well, if you're doing hypertrophy workouts and you're breaking down muscle mass, you could start to maybe lose a little bit of muscle or start to notice your body becoming more mushy and not looking, when you go to flex and there's really not as much there to flex, to me, that's an indication. Like if you have, what's a good indicator is find some indicators on your body, your calves, your legs. Like I'm being totally serious. Flex your legs in the mirror, okay? And on some days, you're going to start to observe that your legs are leaner on some days than others. Well, your legs aren't just necessarily leaner. Sometimes they're like more full. Sometimes they have a little bit more. Sometimes they have a little bit more muscle to them. And what I noticed when I overdid it with fasting, regular fasting, and when I overdid it with sugar fast, was I looked down at my legs and it didn't have the cuts there anymore. And I was like, it's interesting. I'm not inflamed or anything like that. There's nothing weird going on. My body weight is the same. And then I was like, flexing my arms and stuff too. And I'm like, So that's just me guessing that I was potentially losing a little bit of muscle mass. And that was from more so of me doing sugar diet for 6 or 7 months. I did it for months and months, right? And then over time, my protein level was down, right? My protein on the days I was eating protein was only like 100. On the other days, it was pretty much 0, right? Maybe some collagen every once in a while. So going from having, I don't know, let's just say 1,400, 1,500 grams of protein every week to having, I don't know, half that, right? Having maybe, let's just say like 700 grams, going from 1,700 grams a week to having, 800 grams. Well, that's a pretty huge difference, right? And on top of it, I was doing some hypertrophy workouts. So your luck's going to run out with that formula. It's not because you don't necessarily have enough protein. It's because you're breaking down quite a bit of protein, as well as not giving yourself quite enough. But I wasn't off by much. So you still don't necessarily need crazy amounts of protein. You can go like 0.5, 0.7, times your body weight, or you can, find some other formula. You can go, anywhere between 0.5 and 1 gram per pound of lean body weight. And again, if you're doing hypertrophy workouts, you go more towards that 1 gram, right? And you could be assured that it's going to be less likely that you're going to lose appreciable amount of muscle mass. Now, again, we have to keep in mind, any time that you lose body fat, not any time, almost always when you lose substantial amounts of body fat, you are going to lose. When you start to lose that amount of body fat, you're going to lose a little bit of muscle. It's just a natural thing, because normally, under normal circumstances, you are in what we would call a caloric deficit. In this case, this diet seems to be providing something a little different, where your caloric deficit is being moved. Like we just moved the field goal post. Your caloric deficit is being moved a little bit. Your calorie intake, you're allowed to have a little bit more calories and still lose some weight. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know exactly what happens to your muscle, but I feel like I know what was happening to me. I would say the rules are completely different if you're not doing hypertrophy workouts. If you're not doing like bodybuilding workouts and strength workouts where you're really breaking shit down, then I think you can sugar diet your tits off. Like literally, I think you can sugar diet till the cows come home, and you can probably have a lot of success with a lot of weight loss. But at the same time, I want people doing hypertrophy workouts because I want people to be jacked and tan. It's important that you lift. It's a really, I actually say, if you don't lift, you don't count. It's an unfortunate rule that I made, but anybody listening or anybody you know and love that don't lift, they don't count. You got to lift. There's got to be some effort to lift. If you don't lift, you don't count. All right, let's keep it rolling.
If you can do a sugar diet and can make it work, that's going to be the thing that takes off. It's the same reason that my Oreo versus statin study took off. When we did this before with like sweet potatoes and fruit, it didn't. Mm-hmm. So it's what gets amplified. Incentive structures. We come back.
You know what else works? Is just eating good quality food.
Yes, exactly.
And not restricting protein.
He's 100%. He's 1,000% right. And that's why I've been showing so many videos recently of me eating, on my Instagram. It's like, oh, here's me with an Italian dish. Here's me with like basically meat sauce is what I would call it. With 93.7 lean ground beef, along with chopped up, basically non-fat filet steaks in the ground beef. I made like 3 pounds of it the other day. It was absolutely amazing. And there's and I know Paul eats differently than me. He doesn't eat like non-fat or whatever. But I like to keep the fat. I like to keep the fat really low. Because I'm eating because I'm eating a good amount of carbs. Paul's probably eating actually a decent amount of fat, carbs, and protein. He's probably eating a good mix, which is cool. And he's getting auto-regulated a little bit by consuming a lot of fruit and the fatty meat combination. All helps and assists. And I think, I'm even throwing this on some like sourdough bread. Like a lot of this is really fun. Really fun to do. So I usually keep the fats really low, and I usually get the key to the whole thing is really lean meat. You think about any culture or any restaurant, like everyone knows like what an entree is. An entree is like a dish, right? It's like a plate of food. And almost every entree at almost everywhere, whether you're talking about going to someone's house and having an entree or having a dinner, the dinner will almost always require that there's some sort of meat-based, right? Dinner is going to be meat-based. Even a soup is going to have like some meat in it and stuff like that, right? Now, the key is, I think, for people to be leaner is for the meat to be lean. Like you want really lean cuts of meat. And I think that's one of the biggest differences is that, people aren't cooking and there's a lot of other problems, but basically if all the food chains and fast food and all the different things, if everything just changed to being like leaner, we would all be leaner, like the In-N-Out and the McDonald's and all these different things. They're like 80-20. Or even worse, like 75-25. And some of that sounds pretty lean because the first number is pretty big, but even 93.7 lean ground beef, 1 pound of it has 32 grams of fat. That's quite a bit of fat. And a guy my size, needs, I don't know, 2 pounds or so, 1.5 pounds of meat every day almost, to keep, to stay on that 200 to stay within 200 grams of protein in a day. So that would be, like 60 grams of fat, which isn't terrible if that's all the fat that I had for the whole day. But imagine, I have a little bit of fat here, a little bit of fat there. And now, I'm at like 120 or something. And 120 grams of fat with the other macros that I have isn't necessarily going to be something to make me fat. But it's not going to allow me to progress the way that I want. So on my Instagram, Mark Smelly Bell, I've been showing a lot of examples. Smelly's Kitchen is in full effect. I've been showing a lot of examples of the ways that I eat and, just cooking these different food and having a lot of different food options and just, basically giving myself a lot of options and giving you guys that follow along options. And if you like it, then you can follow along and you can, do more of it. Or if you like more what Paul does, then you can follow along more with what he does. Or if you like what Nick does, which is a ketogenic diet, you can kind of follow a little bit more along that. And Dominic D'Agostino, all these different diets, the diet that Paul does can work tremendously. The diet that Nick does can work tremendously. Paul has some nice advantages, like where he lives in Costa Rica, he's got some access to a lot of really cool native electromagnetic fields, such as the UV from the sun and the magnetism of that area. I believe it's pretty like volcanic and stuff like that. And I know some of this like weird science for people, but I think it's important. I think it's probably one of the main reasons why he moved there. And in addition to all the fruit that he's consuming, he's getting all that light. Light and fruit, they go together. Fruit grows in the light. Fruit grows in areas like Costa Rica. Like imagine how much fruit there. Just a lot of you probably been to Hawaii and you know how much fruit is there, right? Like it's just hanging right off the trees over there, right? It's everywhere. And so we know that it grows there, and we do understand that the red light, near infrared light, and some of the light that we get from the sun does have an impact on our metabolism. And so he's getting that advantage where some people, someone in Minnesota or something like that in the middle of the winter eating meat and fruit, they might not have the same exact luck as he has. I'm not saying they're going to get fat because they ate fruit in the wintertime. It's kind of, that's a little bit overkill or a little bit oversimplified. But the outdoors, the sunlight, the activity that he has a tremendous amount of activity. And let's just face it, Paul is a smaller guy. Both these guys are smaller guys. They probably never had an issue with consuming crazy amounts of food. If anything, both of these guys have probably had more issues on the other side of things with digestion. Actually, I know for a fact both of them have. So they don't have they don't have a food consumption problem. And because of that, I would not select Paul's style of dieting with the fattier cuts of meat. If I was going to do Paul's diet or recommend it to people, I would just say, hey, look, take that same diet because the diet principle is nice. And you either cut back on the fruit a bit or you cut back on the fat. And the easiest thing to cut back on is the fat. Just have like leaner cuts and just have leaner choices of meat. It's not really that hard to do. And I'm not saying that he needs to do that. He looks amazing. His skin, like he looks awesome. And I'm super happy for him. And as a friend of his, I'm super proud of him. Like I feel like he kind of grew up on our podcast. He was on the Power Project like maybe 7 or 8 years ago before he was as popular as he is now. So, yeah, I'm grateful that he's kicking ass and doing really well. Let's keep it going.
I think like Nick is saying, it's an illustration of human metabolism as a teaching point, but show me the person that, and Mark Bell's done this in the past, that eats a high quality ketogenic diet and doesn't lose weight, doesn't improve their fertility, doesn't improve their mental health and their sleep.
Right.
Show me the person that eats an animal-based diet with meat and fruit and unprocessed food and doesn't have the same effects.
Is there a certain time you choose to eat fruit during the day? Or
all
is
day.
It all day you eat fruit?
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily in ketosis?
Never.
Really?
Never.
So only eating meat and fruit, so you're never in ketosis?
Never.
Interesting. Do you feel the same energy levels as if you didn't have the fruit added in? Or is there like a huge difference to you adding the fruit in?
Personally, I feel better with the carbohydrates from fruit, things like honey or fruit or squash. I feel better with that. So my energy is more steady. I don't have the electrolyte insufficiency. My testosterone's higher. I sleep better. I had a lot of side effects to long-term keto. I had a lot. Heart palpitations at night. Yeah. And interestingly, if you look at my labs, I just got my blood work, my fasting insulin's 2.3.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast is great. You guys need to check it out. Check out Danny Jones. Check out Paul Saladino and Nick Norwitz hashing out some of this stuff. I love this. I love this format. I love seeing people coming together. It's just so beneficial to hear these people with this high level intelligence, communicating back and forth. And Paul brought up a good point earlier about, show me someone that's doing like just a very healthy diet, and then try to show me somebody that has better health outcomes or has some sort of large advantage over somebody that's eating what I would say lean sources of meat, vegetables, fruit, maybe some dairy. Like, show me somebody that's eating that way, and then try to show me somebody that has some sort of advantage over that person doing some sort of like, specialty diet or diet flavor of the month or year or whatever. And I'm fully aware of these things. So I do think that there are some things you can do from a nutritional perspective that do seem a little magical when you lock into them. And in my own experience, various versions of fasting hit that target really well for weight loss. Paul's not a guy that needs to lose weight. He's not a guy that probably ever had to lose weight. And the same thing is true of Nick Norwitz. These are not guys that Nick's not doing keto to lose weight. These guys know a ton about nutrition, and these guys have tried different diets. I know Nick's tried some different diets. I know Paul has, he was vegan at one point. He was vegan, carnivore, right? And people can look at that as flip-flopping, and I look at it as him trying to find something that's going to work great for him, something that's going to help him to feel good. And I think that it's going to be hard to find somebody with some sort of exponential advantage over someone else because of just a particular style diet. Like, there has to be probably more to it than just the actual diet itself. But some of the other things I've found to be, a little bit more on the magical side, other than intermittent fasting, fruit fasting, dry fasting, by the way, is like pretty damn incredible, but difficult to execute, and maybe maybe a little too unsafe to even mess with. That one's an interesting one. I would have to say, like, protein leveraging is another big pillar right there. You consume lean sources of protein, it drives down your overall your overall hunger, and also your protein per calorie is a really cool and interesting thing to look at. Did you have 3,000 calories in a day and you only had 30 grams of protein? Probably still going to be pretty hungry. If we do that day in, day out, it's a pretty horrific diet. 3,000 calories of primarily carbohydrates and fat and just very, very little protein. That can lead to all kinds of dysfunction. And I know that they were just talking about, FGF21 getting released if you have 9%, but I think that you're still over the protein, you're still over the amount protein wise. Maybe your protein's, 50 or something like that, but you get the picture. By, the standard American diet, people are waking up and they think a muffin's like not that bad, or they don't understand that a bagel with cream cheese is the same as eating a muffin. They don't understand that almost everything that you eat is the same as eating ice cream or the same as eating pizza. So people will go to sushi and they think that sushi is healthy. They're like, oh, I went to sushi last, and then they get like they're getting stuff fried. You're like, wait a second. Okay, that stuff fried isn't good for you, right? But sushi is the same, can be the same as pizza. Sushi can be the same as ice cream. And what the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about from a macronutrient standpoint. Like, you're not going to get away with having, 50, 60 grams. You're not going to get away with having, 150 or 200 grams of carbohydrates in a meal and having like 50 grams of fat. Like, you're not going to be able to do that. Some people are doing that like multiple times a day with, again, very little protein in there. And there needs to be a shift. Like if you just flip-flop the protein and the fat, if you had 50 grams, okay, that's actually a perfect example. You had 50 grams of protein instead of 50 grams of fat. And then you only had 9 grams of fat instead of there only being 9 grams of protein. That would be a great meal. If you had 10 grams of fat in most of your meals for the day, that'd be great. You do that 4 or 5 times a day, 10 grams of fat, 40, 50 grams of fat, that's nothing. That's not a lot. That's a sufficient amount of fat to get in what you need. And then you're, hammering some micronutrients, you get some fruit and some other good sources of energy as well. Potatoes, I don't know, whatever else you're wanting to eat. And you get that protein requirement down pretty good. And you're, you go again, like 1 gram per pound of body weight or 1 gram per pound of desired body weight for protein. You're smashing it. Like you're doing really perfect in a lot of ways. And you're going to be able to eat a lot. See, again, with what Paul does, when you consume foods that are high in fat, and I don't really know exactly what he does nowadays, but when you consume whole eggs and ribeyes and things like that, one thing that's nice about them is they are satiating, they are satisfying because of the amount of fat in them. And so the satiety can last pretty long because of the fat that's in there, which is really nice. And again, for someone like Paul, it probably works out okay. He probably eats like twice a day. Maybe eats like 3 or 4 times a day, but it's probably almost like just fruit every once in a while, or fruit and yogurt, fruit and milk, or whatever. Again, I don't think he's a guy that has to worry about like overconsumption. Maybe he's able to pack down some food. Maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about. Sometimes some of these guys can pack down some food. And interestingly enough, people that are thin can usually, a lot of times, they have a bigger and better appetite than someone that's obese, which is an interesting thing. But someone that's obese, their macronutrients are usually horrible. And they'll take in a lot of calories without getting much satiation. You get satiation from protein. You get satisfaction from fat, and you get your energy from carbohydrates. That's the way I look at it. That's the simplest way I can ever put it is right like that. And in my opinion, if your fats are between like 50 and 70, if you're a smaller framed person, maybe you go a little lower than that. And if your carbohydrates are between 200 and 400 and your protein is, 150 to 200, I think you're good to go. Maybe the protein could be as low as 100 depending on your size. Like those macronutrients should work out very easily for you. But what was I going to say about, eating the higher fat foods? Sometimes if you're a hungrier person, you may find yourself continually overeating if you're someone that's doing meat and fruit. It still might be kind of easy to overeat. So that's what I'm just saying. I'm not saying you can't have a ribeye. And I'm not saying you can't have some buffalo wings and things like that. What I'm saying is that maybe just try not to have that every meal. If you're going to have 50 grams of fat, go, wait a second. Okay, 50 grams of fat here. Okay, the next meal should be about half that, okay? Right? And you start to kind of look at it logically. Anyway, if you are, on the Paul Saladino meat and fruit bandwagon, then I think that's awesome. I think it's incredible. If you're somebody that's doing the ketogenic diet from Nick Norwitz, or you're somebody that's been experimenting with what I've been messing with, which is the sugar diet. Again, I only use it a couple times a week, and I basically just follow a standard bodybuilding diet the rest of the week. Whatever it is, try to hang your hat on it and try to utilize a diet for as long as you can. Find something that you can stick to. Compliance is the science. The thing that you'll stick to is going to be the thing that works. Most people don't have an issue with losing weight. They have an issue with keeping it off. They tend to gain the weight back. And just because someone gains the weight back does not mean that the diet wasn't sustainable. What it means is that the person wasn't able to sustain the diet. The diet itself could be done every single day by a person, but for some reason, for that person, for their household, for their mindset, for their this, for their that, it didn't work amazingly well for them, or it just stopped working. And now they need to look elsewhere and find another program. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later.